Right, hello there. This is just a quick stream. I'm going to do some modelling, so might as well do it live. Doing it live. Going to make, whoops, a witch's coffee cup. So we need the female accessory file. There won't be too much explanation through this, because, well, reasons. You might get an indication of how quickly you can do something without having to explain everything. So that's okay. Right, so add mesh UV sphere. Let's drop that down. Wireframe. So we can see the subdivisions. Focus on our object, which is frame selected. So just yeah, that'll do. Right, organize the scene, new collection, mug. That allows us just then to, whoops, we have to right, so now I can start doing some modeling or meshing. Don't need a top. Whoops. This is the only downside to using these tools, is that it's far too easy to deselect something. So don't need that. Or maybe. Oh, let's just separate that. Yeah, that'll be all right. Smoothing. Edge select. Extrude. Scale. Using a lot of shortcuts for this. Just because it's easier and quicker. Edge split, disable angle, and we want to mark some edges. Edge, sharp, That'll be all right. Some feet. Simple feet. Whoops. Whoops. Don't need that top face. So we have to account for the shape of the cup. Which is why you sometimes have to over-exaggerate the shape of things in order to accommodate the curvature. That's all right. So what's the angle of that? Rotation, that's fine. 3D cursor. Linked duplicate. Rotate. $120. Link duplicate. $120. Smooth. So we created, let's undo that, by splitting that edge it creates an n-gon, so it's got more than 4 sides. So then when we shape that, we have to adjust the formation of the faces. So we have a quad and then a triangle. So Control T and then join. Come on. It's not going to do it now. Oh, it's Alt J. What's Control J? Oh, that's join. Join meshes. Triangulate. Add cube, scale down, so we can create a handle from this, so we can do it a couple of ways. Whoops. We can basically, let's just get the shape that we want. Right, so we can basically inset, so that's the I key, or using the inset tool. So what is that? Set 80. Undo. So start the tool, type 80. Same again on the other side. Click, drag the tool to start it, type a value, 80, and then enter to return. So we can then get rid of these faces, don't need them. And depending on the shape that we want, let's move this out. Delete those, we don't need those. So what we can do here is edges, create a face, so that's F, and we've still got tool active. F, F, loop cut, auto center, loop cut, auto center, and then to get the round shape, or roundish, because we're in low poly, remember. Whoops. Before we do that, what we need to do is loop cut, then we can collapse, so edge slide, select, clean up, scale. So there's the basic handle, and then of course it's just a question of playing around with the size of it. Edge loop. So we don't necessarily want this to be straight. Right, so that's the handle. Looks a little bit like somebody's ear. Some unfortunate soul whose ear has been turned into a handle. There. Way too easy to get hung up on these shapes. Right, so let's just save the file. Materials, so new so that'll assign it to the whole thing because we've only got the one material assigned. What we can then do is invert the selection, so Control I, add another material, assign, select from the list, where's the mag, there's the mag, assign, change the colour of that so we can see, and there is our coffee mug. Same for the legs. Mug. File, save as, to right, I'm going to unwrap this, so join everything together. That's Control J. Double check our faces are pointing in the right direction. Everything is blue. So now, what we want to do, shading. So basic material, add texture, image texture, connect color output, base color input, and then create a new texture. .512 by 256. Color grid. Okay. And of course it's got the image appears because it's got a basic UV map, which we will then edit. So that's the mug, that's the coffee. So add texture, image texture, connect, new, coffee. So UV maps. Yep, UV maps. Have to reset the view again. Scale 100. Double check. Right. So that's our texture that we're working with on the left side. Select the material, select, So that's selecting everything to do with the coffee cup. That is the base unwrap, but we're going to adjust all of that. So unwrap. That's what we get by default, and these are all the parts, and they're all a bit of a mess. So I'm going to place a seam. We're going to hide it, or disguise it, where the handle is. So the handle detail will obscure the fact that there's a seam there. I'm going to place a seam around the coffee. And that should go across to the other side, just one loop. Edge, mark seam. We'll have to do the same thing on the handle. So we'll unwrap or mark the seam on the inside, because that's going to be hidden, well, not hidden from view, but less likely to be seen. It's edge, mark seam. So now when we unwrap this, we'll get a different effect. So select, UV, unwrap. So it then does that. So now comes the joy of editing the UVs. Oh, we want to make sure that UV snap to pixels is on. Select everything and just give it a quick manipulation to snap everything to the grid. So select the vertex pin, select vertex, pin that, unwrap. So let's just hide these bits for the moment. Hide. So select H. What's that? Not sure where that's from. Might have to do a... So select all. Mesh. Clean up. Merge by vertex. Increase the size to 1. Where's that edge vertex come from then? Oh, it's that. Coffee. Let's just unwrap that then. Oh, right. So, of course, if you select something and you select an entire loop around another surface, it might inadvertently also select the vertex, not the element, because you have all the surrounding elements selected that you could otherwise use to select that element. So if we select all these edges around, that face in the middle selects even though we don't want it to. So if it's select mug, select, so it hasn't done it there, so that's good. Or has it? No, it hasn't. So now we don't have that errant, so let's select these and hide them. H. Make that a bit easier to see. pin. Do the same on the other side. Oops. Unwrap. So we can sort out distribution later. What we're trying to do is just get the thing into a uniform shape that we can then alter. Pin, unwrap. So now we can even out the distribution. And straighten it out. So the only thing that you really need to align and make sure is on whatever grid that you're after is the seam. So that has to match on both sides. Straighten out the bottom. Right, so that one is down here and that one is there. Unwrap. Right, so that's that more or less done. So we can fix all of that, just pin it all, scale it down, move it, select all the other bits apart from that, and unwrap them. So that's the handle and the feet. Could also probably do them better that way. Yeah. Right, so that's the cup. Let's save this, save as. Number 3. So what we want to do now is export all of this as our texture map. Export UV layout. Fill opacity to 1. That's all right. Export. Let's check the map. Right, so that's the map. We could probably use this space a bit better. So I'm just going to view, area, maximize area. Because what we can do use the space up a bit more. Because the feet don't need to be that big, and we want to accommodate maybe being able to write some text on the mug, like world's best witch or something. Right, so let's re-export that. Wherever that's gone. Right, do some texture painting. So let's just update that. So that's what we had. That's what we've got. So texture paint. And again, we have to reset the view because Blender remembers its defaults instead of the ones that are being used in the file. Select texture, mug. And then we've got the tools, so we can either use the sliders or not, or the properties at the top of each view, or this. So we can either paint on the mesh or on the texture. So this is just painting with a mouse, not using a tablet or whatever it is. And we want to make sure that we paint over the edges, otherwise it pixelates. So where the cup handle is, where the feet are, because we end up with whatever colour or tone is painted or omitted from those areas will show through. And that's why you often get those weird highlights around the edges of things where they are intersecting other elements of the mesh. I get rid of that shininess. So that's the material specular. Or does it keep it by default? Oh, it's always displayed by default. Makes it kind of tricky to see what you're doing. Right, so smudge. So we can see what's happening on the texture side of things. That's quite funny, that. So So although we don't have the liquid texture selected, it's still being painted on. So this is also one of the reasons why you want to try and leave some space around your UVs if you're going to use Blender's texture painting tools, because you can so in the 3D view the brush stays relative to how far you are zoomed in to the object, but on the actual texture itself it doesn't. It's controlled by the radius. Because the brush is relative to the pixels, not the mesh. So if you're going to use Blender's texture paint tools, keep that in mind when you're laying out your UV map. Smudge. So that will be our textures. So that's the coffee cup. That's the coffee cup. And that is the coffee itself. So we're going to save these. So File, Save As. TGA, save, oops. Because what we can then do is just check those, whoops. Oops, that's the pot. Don't want the pot. So there's the mug. And there's the broth. So those are two images that we can now load back into Blender. So shading. So which one have we got? Mug. There it is, coffee mug. So we don't see any difference, obviously, because they're exactly the same. And coffee. And there is our coffee. So that is our coffee mug. And obviously you can clean those up if you want to, or you would be able to clean those up in your image editor. So save this file, save as 5. Right, so accessory. So that's the avatar. That's the skeleton. So what we want to do with this is join everything together so it's all single mesh. So we need to make sure that we get all this right before making it an accessory. So the important thing is to make sure that you've got your materials set up correctly. So it's a label, coffee or mug. That's your label. That just helps you identify what you're looking at in Blender. To IMVU, it's immaterial. You could assign materials, half a dozen of them, and they could all be called coffee or mug. So you had mug 1, mug 2, mug 3, mug 4. So long as you have the square brackets, the number, square brackets, so long as this is incremental, so 0, 1, 2, 3, upwards of however many materials you are using, IMVU will recognize the material slots. So always make sure that your materials are set up correctly. Let's just also rename this coffee mug.mesh. This just makes it easier to see what we're looking at. And of course we've got the top. So if you wanted to, you could make a, what's it called? A top for this that would just sit on there for one of those lids that keeps your drink hot for a long time. But we don't need that. So coffee mug. Grab that. Just going to move it into place. So we have to position it relative to the avatar's hand. I'm not going to create a pose for this because it's unreliable. So this is just basically a cup. Well, depending on how you actually want to do this, because you could just do there are two types of people in the world. People who drink coffee using the handle, and people correctly who hold on to the coffee cup itself. So that's all we're doing. It's just positioning the cup. Huge cup. Near the avatar's hand. And of course, if you wanted to do a left and a right version, so that's our first version, rename that. Oh, that should be a dot, not a thing. So let's just RT right. Duplicate that. Whoops. We don't want a link duplicate. We want an individual. So duplicate objects. Move that over to the other side. And it's best, don't make them identical. But just then position that relative to the avatar's hand. Like so ish. And we don't have to worry too much about the avatar's hand intersecting, so burying itself in the cup, because the way that we've constructed this, we've allowed, or we've compensated for that by actually creating an inside. So those are our two bongos. Save as, number 6. Right, so for this, what we want, mesh, edit mode, select all, and object data properties, vertex groups, want to create a new group, plus, double click, rename this attachment root, assign, so we can then test, do the same with the other one, but we'll leave that for now. What are these called? Modifiers. Modifier. What have we got here? Oh, that's the edge split. We want an armature modifier. And that needs to be associated with the tiny little bone or armature that's hidden. Whoops. In here. Where is it? There it is. Hide the hand. It's there. So we want to select our mesh, apply our modifier, click the eyedropper, and then click on the armature, so you'll get this little highlight, object, colon, RT hand, attachment root. That then becomes the object. So that now controls our pot, our coffee cup, which we can then test by switching to pose mode whilst the armature is selected, clicking the bones. So that's attachment node, click again, and we select attachment root, and that moves our coffee mug. And hide the hand, which is, where is it? So now, let's just save this, save as, number 7, save as, then we can export. Oh, still in. Just hide that so we can select it. So, mesh, armature, so mesh armature, make sure the armature is highlighted brighter orange. File, export, FBX, file dialog, settings. So we want selected objects, everything else is okay. Geometry, that's fine. Armature, always disable, add leaf bones. Don't need animation, so disable. Name's okay, location is okay. Export. So hopefully this will work. Create mode. Drive new product. Female accessory. Go. So there are the glasses. We're going to replace those. So import the FBX, load FBX. Find the file. Coffee cup. Open. So always select the one or the option that's attachment root. Usually it's going to be 2 bones, 1 mesh. Configure. This has brought it all in. And we want this to replace the glasses. So for the female accessory, that's mesh ID 2. For male, it's mesh ID 0. So 2, change scale 0.01. So it's got our mesh, it's got our materials, and that's all we need. Import. It's going to override the default, so that's good. We need that. Import. Apply changes. And the coffee cup will appear at the head by default. So going to config, then we type RT hand, and there is our jumbo coffee cup in the hand. And it's automatically set up the materials for us. It's brought those in. No actions. So that's the assets. And if you wanted to make this compatible for both male and female without having to then export 2 sets of projects, comma 191. So there is your witch's coffee mug. Hello there, Sakuru. Whoops. So if you wanted to do a pose for this, we won't do this in this particular episode, have a look at the witch's cooking pot that we did previously. But if you do a pose, do be aware that it may not work the way that you expect it to, because those particular types of items are a hack rather than a genuine product. So the poses may not work properly. But if this were a furniture item with a pose included, it'll be fine. but it obviously then means that your coffee cup would be floating around in midair with the pose attached to it. So that is our witch's coffee cup. And if export doesn't work the way that you expect it to, what you can do, although this won't work necessarily with, let's try, whilst we've got a few minutes, the dreaded IMVU Studio. Cue spooky music. Right, so this is IMVU Studio. Let's create a new project. We want accessories, female accessories, glasses. So that's what we've got on the right. Derive. So similar process, we're going to do import our FBX and replace the glasses. So hamburger, edit, import. Find our FBX file, coffee cup, set up FBX. So change scale 0.01. Skeleton, again, similar to classic. We want attachment root, 2 bones, 1 mesh. Coffee cup, mesh. Next. Got our materials. Next. No animation. Review. That's okay. Then import. Then it's going to think about it. There is our coffee cup, and it hasn't replaced the mesh because we have to do this in a slightly different way. So component, mesh, we have to select the glasses mesh. That's what we're going to replace. And then in the asset tab, we then need to select the mesh. Preview. So it's replaced the glasses with our mesh, so we've basically overridden the default. So now we need to select the skeleton, and then we need to override the node that's being used. So RT hand, preview. And there is the coffee cup in the avatar's hand. So it's a bit more, there are more steps. There are a couple of more steps because the way that Studio works, it's separated everything out. So rather than having everything in the one screen, we've got our mesh asset info in its own tab and the materials in its own tab, and we have to essentially set each component up in order for it to work properly. but that's how you import. So file, edit, import, then go through the steps, and then once you've got your mesh imported, you have to then select the mesh that you're going to override, so female glasses, and then set the asset that it's going to be overridden with, and then it should work. So let's just save that file, whoops, save as. So that was Studio. Right, so this was just a quickie today. Call it quits there. Well, I say a quickie, that's an hour and 20 minutes. We'll call it quits there, and we shall see you on the next stream, whenever that is, and whatever it's about. Might be Creator Mass, doing Christmas themed items, but we'll see. Right, so do the usual thing, subscribe, click the buttons and do the what's-its, and we shall see you anon, as they say. Right, bye for now.